news after almost 3 years, almost 3 years after a massive earthquake and tsunami ushered in the worst nuclear disaster since Chernobyl. We're just now learning the truth of what went down in the wake of the Fukushima Daiichi meltdown. New reports suggest that the U.S. Navy knew all along that sailors on the USS Reagan, a ship supposedly used to transport humanitarian supplies in the wake of the March 11, 2011 earthquake and tsunami, were exposed to dangerous levels of radiation. If true, these reports could have a big impact on the $1 billion lawsuit filed by the Reagan's sailors against Tokyo Electric Power, TEPCO, the company in charge of the Fukushima plant. Many of those sailors are suffering from health problems commonly associated with radiation exposure, even though the Navy denies they had contact with radiation levels dangerous enough to cause these kinds of health problems. And while the sailors on the USS Reagan have had to worry about radiation-related health problems for almost 3 years, everyone on the Pacific coast of the United States might soon be facing exposure as well. Scientists have already detected Fukushima radiation off the coast of Vancouver, and others think that more could be coming as soon as April. Joining me now for more on all of this is Paul Gunter, director of the Reactor Oversight Project at Beyond Nuclear. Also with me tonight is progressive commentator Nate Sweet. And Paul, welcome back. Nate, welcome back.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you both. Paul, there's new reports about the Navy's knowledge. What do these reports say, in essence?
Well, you know, the concern all along is why was the USS Ronald Reagan just a couple of miles away from the Fukushima coast? And it's been our concern that they were there to lay a power line from the ship's nuclear reactor to the Fukushima Daiichi reactors, which were in station blackout, and they were trying to repower up the cooling system. So they had to get this aircraft carrier in really close, and as a result, there were the explosions, which lofted radioactivity into the atmosphere, but there was also the radioactivity flowing into the ocean water that was being sucked into the Ronald Reagan's desalination plant. And so the ship was taking in radioactive water, and then it was going into the drinking water, bathing, cooking, ship service systems, and a lot of crew members got exposed. We're only seeing initially, you know, under 100 right now, but we expect this exposure rate to go up.
Yeah, this is a nuclear-powered carrier, though. I mean, they have, my understanding, I mean, from watching the Tom Clancy movies, you know, is that when you've got a nuclear reactor on board, like on a submarine or an aircraft carrier, you've got all kinds of radiation detectors all over the thing, that if radiation is detected, sirens go off and people jump up and down with their hair on fire. And, you know, how come none of that happened?
Well,
or did it?
Clearly, these sailors were put into harm's way, and their mission was, you know, clearly vital, but to hold back information. I think one of the big concerns that we've got is that now the U.S. Navy is saying that these sailors didn't get any more radiation than you would get on an airplane flight, or, you know, being exposed to rocks. But clearly, you know, it's so disingenuous to try to make that distinction between internal exposure when these sailors were inhaling radiation as opposed to external exposure. You don't inhale rocks. You don't eat dirt. You know, these exposures have much more significant consequence when you take it into the soft tissue like muscle or bone marrow or thyroid. These are much more significant exposures than what the Navy's letting on right now.
I guess the big question here is, if the USS Ronald Reagan was on a mission to try to hold off some sort of disaster at the Fukushima power plant, why didn't the Navy come clean with that earlier on? Is there some ulterior motive there, or did they just want to, you know, quell any fears of a nuclear disaster?
Right. You know, originally the stories were that the Reagan didn't come within 100 miles of the coastline, and that they were flying aircraft, helicopters in this humanitarian mission. But, you know, right now, Congress is asking a lot more questions. The omnibus budget bill for 2014 basically wants an inventory now of from the Secretary of Navy for what these sailors and Marines were exposed to, and what are the ailments that they're suffering from, and what was the mission. And so these are now going to be significant questions. We're looking to get answers hopefully as early as April 2014.
Yeah.
And could, the Navy has been blocked from being sued by the sailors that are currently suing TEPCO right now. Could these new revelations potentially change that, or will things stay as they are and only TEPCO be sued by the sailors?
Right now, the suit is focused on the fact that Tokyo Electric Power Company misled, withheld, lied, falsified information. I think that the focus is going to be on Japan and the Tokyo Electric Power Company right now. I mean, obviously there's a tug of war going on as well between, the status of our U.S. naval military ports in Japan and how this whole thing washes out.
I was wondering, what is the point of intersection where, the Navy uses nuclear power, so maybe they don't want to, but the bases, now that's when the penny dropped for me. That makes perfect sense. I mentioned in my introduction, we're hearing reports that Fukushima-based radiation is starting to show up on the west coast of North America. Is that the case? I know a lot of these radioisotopes have probably by this time already decayed. The iodine, for example, is probably decayed to the point where it's not of great consequence. What about things like cesium and strontium that are hyper bioavailable? The body thinks that they're potassium and calcium, respectively. What's showing up? And also, the really heavy nuclides, the actinides, the transuranic elements, those are super heavy. Wouldn't they have settled to the bottom of the ocean long before they got to the West Coast?
Well, I think that what we're seeing right now is the leading edge of the plume that has had several transport mechanisms. Initially, 80% of the radioactivity that was released from the Fukushima accident was to the atmosphere, and it blew out into the ocean. It rained out into the ocean. And then along about March 15th, 2011, there was a huge radioactive liquid discharge into the ocean. And then there's the debris field that has radioactivity in it. And now we've seen an ongoing discharge of radioactive cesium, a whole soup of radioactive isotopes that are feeding into this plume from ongoing discharges. Most recently, we're seeing reports of discharges 7 million times the cesium levels that are supposedly permitted, but they're showing up right now in this initial leading edge, and we're going to be seeing these counts get higher, we suspect. But the concern is that there's not effective monitoring right now.
The government shut down basically all the monitors. Now we've just got these volunteer networks that are coming to being.
And should anybody be concerned of any health consequences of the radiation coming into the Pacific Coast? Should people who eat food from that area be concerned of eating that food?
Well, according to the University of Alaska, their Fisheries and Ocean Science Division, there's no definitive answer right now. These are still very early stages. The concern is, though, that we are seeing radioactive contamination along the marine food chain.
Paul, pardon my interruption. We have just a minute. I wanted to get into the waste isolation pilot project. You guys are monitoring that in the minute we have left.
Right. We have the waste isolation pilot project outside of Carlsbad, New Mexico. It's a Department of Energy facility for storing nuclear waste, principally plutonium, from the nuclear weapons facility. It was licensed for 10,000 years. But on February 5th, there was a fire down there. And now we have, just 15 years into the operation of this facility, we have radioactive plutonium and americium surfacing now, being evidenced in radioactive monitors a half a mile from the site, and just recently the announcement that 13 DOE contractors who were working on the surface at the time have now been internally contaminated by radioactivity.
And plutonium is the most deadly substance known to man, and that's amazing. Paul Gunter, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Tom.
And,
Thank you.
And Nate will be back with us in our next block. Stick around.